Welcome to a new episode where we explore the most fascinating and complex aspects of ancient history. Today, we'll immerse ourselves in a controversial and little-known topic: sex between Roman soldiers and the question of who was considered the weak one in these relationships. If you thought you knew everything about the Roman army, prepare yourself for a complex and surprising human reality. Get comfortable, because what's about to come will challenge your ideas about sexuality in the ancient world. Imagine the year 117 AD. Emperor Trajan has just died in Sicily after expanding the Roman Empire from the mists of Scotland to the sands of Mesopotamia. In a fortress on the Danube frontier, home to 5,000 legionaries, a human story unfolds that official chroniclers never documented, but which archaeologists have brought to light through private letters, barracks graffiti, and fragmentary testimonies that survived for almost 2,000 years. These soldiers, mostly young, came from all over the empire: Hispanics from Lusitania, Gauls from Narbonensis, Romanized Germans, Greeks from Asia Minor, Egyptians from the Nile Delta, and Italics. During their 25 years of mandatory military service, they lived in an exclusively male society, regulated by codes of honor, discipline, and an inflexible hierarchy that dictated every aspect of their daily life, from marches to guard shifts. Sexuality in the legions was much more complex than traditional historians have acknowledged. For centuries, the image of stoic soldiers who repressed their sexual desires in the name of discipline and the glory of Rome has been perpetuated. However, recent research based on archaeological finds such as wooden tablets and papyri, and reinterpretations of ancient sources, reveal a completely different truth. Roman soldiers were human beings with emotional, physical, and sexual needs that didn't disappear just because they swore allegiance to the legionary eagle. During long military campaigns, far from the women of their culture, in hostile territories where survival depended on group cohesion, they developed intimate relationships that allowed them to endure the brutal realities of ancient warfare. Roman sexuality operated under profoundly different moral codes from ours. What defined whether a relationship was honorable or degrading was not the gender of the participants, but the role assumed in the sexual act and the social position of the individuals involved. A Roman citizen could have sexual relations with other men without losing honor in the slightest, as long as he always assumed the active role, considered appropriate and dignified for a free male. This principle transferred with even greater force to the military sphere, where hierarchies were even more rigid and inflexible. A veteran centurion who maintained sexual relations with common soldiers under his command was never criticized or condemned. On the contrary, these interactions were often seen as a natural part of military mentorship that transformed inexperienced young recruits into tempered and effective warriors. Private letters found in Roman fortresses, such as Vindolanda in Britain or Dura Europos on the eastern frontier, show an incredibly rich and complex emotional world. A particularly moving letter discovered in 1985 in a Roman fort in Germany, written by a soldier named Lucius Aeternius to his suite Marcellus, describes with profound nostalgia the devastating loneliness after his companion's transfer. The letter uses sophisticated poetic metaphors about cold and lonely nights, burning memories of past intimate encounters that reveal without any doubt the existence of a deep and lasting love relationship, full of authentic tenderness and intense mutual desire. This is not an isolated case, but represents a documented pattern throughout the Roman Empire. Sexual relationships between soldiers followed very precise patterns that reflected both fundamental human needs and rigid Roman military structures. The most common and socially accepted form was what modern scholars call erotic mentorship, a structured relationship between a veteran of 30 to 40 years, with at least 10 years of military service behind him, and a young, newly enlisted recruit. This relationship combined in a complex way practical military teaching, almost paternal protection, and regular sexual intimacy. It was not at all considered a deviation or perversion, but was seen as an integral and natural part of the integration process into legionary life. The experienced veteran taught the young recruit the most effective combat techniques, the sacred traditions of the legion, the secrets of battlefield survival. At the same time, he protected the vulnerable novice from possible abuse by other older soldiers and from the ruthless harshness of military life. Sexual intimacy arose naturally from forced cohabitation and constant proximity. The two men shared the same tent during military campaigns, literally slept, embraced to conserve precious body heat during freezing nights in the cold climates of the northern frontiers. They bathed together completely naked in cold rivers or improvised baths built in military camps, and depended completely on each other for survival during bloody battles. In this context of constant physical proximity, daily intimacy, and absolute mutual dependence, sexual attraction and romantic affection were practically inevitable. These relationships, nevertheless, followed very rigorous and well-defined codes of honor. The older veteran always assumed the sexually active role, considered appropriate for his age, experience, and superior rank. The young recruit, instead, temporarily accepted the passive role, knowing perfectly well that this dynamic would change progressively as he gained military experience and rose in rank in the legionary hierarchy. These relationships typically lasted from 2 to 4 years, until the recruit became sufficiently experienced and independent to assume in turn the role of mentor for a new arrival. Even if the strictly sexual aspect of the relationship naturally ended, the deep emotional and affective bonds often endured for life, creating indestructible personal loyalties that enormously strengthened the cohesion and effectiveness of the military unit. These relationships were characterized by authentic and intense emotions. Older veterans often felt a genuinely paternal affection mixed with sexual desire toward their young recruits, while inexperienced novices experienced a complex mixture of heroic admiration, profound gratitude, and true romantic love toward their veteran protectors and lovers. However, sexual relationships between soldiers of similar rank or the same age, without the protective and socially accepted structure of mentorship, were decidedly more risky and problematic. In these cases, deciding who should assume the sexually passive role became a delicate and potentially explosive question, because Romans considered this role as profoundly degrading and humiliating for any free Roman citizen. This was particularly true for a professional soldier, whose very masculine identity and personal honor were closely tied to his ability to fight courageously and dominate enemies on the battlefield. To avoid dangerous conflicts and preserve the harmony necessary for military survival, soldiers involved in equal relationships often consciously alternated sexual roles. This practice allowed preserving mutual dignity through a carefully negotiated balance, based on absolute mutual trust and continuous intimate communication. Roman soldiers also used complex rituals of what modern scholars call compensatory masculinity. After assuming the sexually passive role in an intimate encounter, a soldier participated with particular aggression in public physical competitions. He engaged in particularly violent and spectacular training duels, or performed extraordinary feats of courage during subsequent battles. All this to publicly and dramatically reaffirm his indisputable virility before the entire assembled legion. Explicit graffiti discovered in Roman fortresses scattered from Hadrian's Wall in Britain to the banks of the Euphrates in Mesopotamia unequivocally demonstrate that these homosexual relationships were extremely common and socially accepted. The inscriptions include graphic and detailed descriptions of specific sexual encounters, passionate declarations of eternal love carved in stone, and sophisticated erotic poems that celebrated with refined language the physical beauty and moral virtues of beloved companions. A particularly eloquent inscription found in Pannonia in 1992 reads thus: "Under the sacred eagles of Rome, Gaius found in Marcus not only a faithful brother in arms, but the divine fire that transforms raw iron into precious gold and paralyzing fear into indomitable courage." This poetic language clearly suggests that sexual relationships between soldiers were considered not only acceptable, but even essential and beneficial for forming exceptional warriors and invincible military units. Roman literary sources, such as the satirical epigrams of Martial, the harsh, moralistic invectives of Juvenal, and the racy novel by Petronius, all present these military relationships as perfectly normal and widespread behaviors. Vegetius, in his influential technical treatise on Roman military science, repeatedly alludes, albeit discreetly, to the fundamental importance of these intimate bonds for maintaining high troop morale and ensuring the iron cohesion necessary during the most desperate and bloody battles. Surviving military testaments offer particularly moving documentary evidence of these profound romantic bonds. Titus Flavius Virilis, a veteran centurion who died heroically during the brutal siege of Jerusalem in the year 70 AD, left all his considerable earthly possessions to my dearest and most beloved Marcus Antonius Priscus, my faithful companion in war and sweet consolation in peace. This intimate and affectionate language unequivocally suggests the existence of a deep love relationship that probably lasted many years. Military funeral rituals also reveal the existence and social importance of these profound romantic bonds. When a soldier died in battle or from illness, very often another specific soldier personally assumed complete responsibility for his elaborate funeral. He paid out of pocket for particularly elaborate and poetic tombstone inscriptions, for expensive votive offerings, for solemn funeral ceremonies. A tomb discovered in the ancient military city of Carnuntum in 1978 honors with touching poetic verses the memory of a soldier named Lucius Ductius. The objects buried with the deceased included 2 identical rings clearly intended for a couple, an elaborate wine cup with 2 symmetrical handles for drinking together, and a precious statuette of Venus that evidently the 2 men shared as a sacred symbol of their love. All these objects clearly reflect a deep, intimate and romantic connection, publicly recognized even in death. Naturally, not everything was romantic and consensual in this brutal military world. The inevitable dark side included frequent sexual abuse, with corrupt and sadistic officers who forcibly compelled terrified young recruits to submit sexually. The Lex Julia Divi Publica, an important law promulgated under Emperor Augustus, theoretically punished these criminal acts with death by beheading or perpetual exile to remote islands. But the practical application of the law depended completely on the will and moral integrity of individual commanders. Honest soldiers spontaneously created informal protective networks to defend the youngest and most vulnerable, and in the most extreme and intolerable cases, physically eliminated abusive officers in apparent accidents during confused battles. The Roman military disciplinary system included brutal punishments such as public flogging, a merciless beating conducted publicly before the entire assembled legion that could reach up to 200 bloody lashes for behaviors considered particularly degrading to military honor, such as practicing male prostitution, an activity strictly prohibited by law for all free Roman citizens. In conquered territories where male prostitution was culturally accepted and widely practiced, such as in ancient Greece or Hellenistic Egypt, Roman soldiers inevitably faced strong moral temptations. The most pragmatic and realistic commanders allowed controlled visits to local female prostitutes, or specially created separate recreational spaces, such as temporary brothels, organized directly in large permanent military camps. All this to prevent soldiers from violating the severe Roman laws on male prostitution. During particularly long military campaigns, such as the famous siege of Jerusalem that lasted almost 4 full years of suffering, Emperor Vespasian explicitly permitted soldiers regular visits to nearby allied cities to find sexual relief, while other practical commanders organized elaborate religious festivals that included socially acceptable ritual sexual elements as part of the worship of the gods. In the total absence of available women during long campaigns in completely hostile territories, some commanders pragmatically tolerated homosexual relationships among their soldiers, as long as these rigorously respected military hierarchies and traditional codes of honor. Wisely recognizing that attempting to completely repress the natural sexuality of men was not only impossible, but also dangerously counterproductive to morale. Religious festivals dedicated to Mars, supreme god of war, such as the famous Armilustrium, solemnly celebrated every October throughout the empire, explicitly included ceremonies with ritual sexual components, practices considered sacred forms of divine worship rather than simple licentiousness. These religious ceremonies officially blessed the profound emotional and sexual bonds between soldiers, considering them divinely inspired sacred brotherhoods that miraculously strengthened mutual loyalty and military effectiveness. During these important festivals, soldiers freely participated in traditional athletic competitions completely naked, elaborate banquets with abundant wine, and sexual encounters both heterosexual with temple priestesses and homosexual between comrades in arms. All activities religiously intended as forms of direct mystical communion with the powerful god of war who protected the invincible Roman legions. Ancient and modern military historians agree that these intimate relationships significantly improved practical military effectiveness, motivating extraordinary heroic feats on the battlefield. In the disastrous Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, where 3 entire Roman legions were completely annihilated by German warriors, surviving testimonies describe with admiration Roman soldiers who fought literally to the death to protect their wounded and dying companions, behavior that strongly suggests the existence of very deep personal bonds that went well beyond simple military camaraderie. However, these intense romantic relationships inevitably also created dangerous tactical vulnerabilities that the most cunning enemies could ruthlessly exploit. Particularly intelligent enemy commanders deliberately sought to identify and separate couples of lovers during battles to cause devastating psychological trauma. And the sudden and violent death of a lover could literally render a surviving soldier completely unusable for combat due to paralyzing grief. The progressive integration of non-Roman auxiliary troops, German warriors from the northern forests, Gauls from fertile France, Thracian cavalry from the Balkans, further complicated the already complex sexual dynamics of mixed legions. Their very different cultural traditions, such as the ceremonial homosexual bonds openly practiced in Celtic societies, required delicate cultural negotiations and practical compromises. The wise philosopher-emperor Marcus Aurelius explicitly permitted foreign auxiliaries to maintain their traditional sexual customs as long as these did not negatively affect general military discipline, and many curious Roman legionaries willingly adopted some exotic Germanic sexual rituals, gradually creating fascinating hybrid military cultures that mixed Roman and barbarian traditions. The private letters that soldiers wrote to their distant families systematically used elaborately coded terms such as special brothers of destiny or soulmates to discreetly describe their romantic lovers without scandalizing traditionalist relatives who remained at home. A particularly touching letter written by a soldier named Gaius Valerius to his mother, who lived in the city of Tarragona in Spain, poetically speaks of a brother of destiny, dearer and more precious than the very light of the sun, who miraculously makes the freezing and endless nights of Germany warm and comfortable, like the sweet Italian spring. After completing the 25 long years of mandatory military service, the moment of forced retirement inevitably and painfully separated many couples of veteran lovers. Some fortunate ex-soldiers managed to settle together permanently in veteran colonies, such as the famous Emerita Augusta in Spain, presenting themselves publicly to society as simple business partners or housemates to avoid scandals. Other veterans married local women to conform to traditional social expectations, but discreetly maintained their deep emotional bonds with former lovers through formal veterans associations that organized regular nostalgic banquets and ceremonies that subtly recreated the ancient sexual rituals of youthful military life. Military temples scattered throughout the empire contained numerous moving, votive inscriptions, such as one discovered in the city of Roman London, which celebrates 30 uninterrupted years of a faithful relationship with veiled but unmistakable poetic references to secret victories conquered in the warm and protective intimacy of our shared military tents. These Roman military cultural traditions profoundly influenced subsequent medieval armies, such as the legendary Templar Knights, and directly inspired famous chivalric epics such as the Song of Roland, perpetuating through the centuries the romantic idea that intimate and passionate bonds between warriors miraculously strengthened their valor in battle. Roman soldiers learned to skillfully reconcile their complex, existential duality. They were ruthless war machines during bloody daytime battles, but became surprisingly tender and affectionate lovers during quiet nights in military camps. Respected military treatise writers such as Vegetius and Frontinus explicitly emphasized in their technical manuals that authentic love between brothers in arms significantly strengthened their performance during mortal combat. The solemn military promotion ceremonies and sacred oaths of loyalty to the legion deliberately used intensely romantic language, with soldiers formally promising to protect each other's sacred honor until death do us part, a phrase that directly echoes traditional marriage vows. Surviving military administrative records clearly show that recognized couples of lovers regularly received special double rations of fine wine and olive oil, and that official testaments frequently designated companions as principal heirs, using unmistakably intimate and affectionate language. The very architecture of permanent Roman military installations, with their elaborate baths equipped with small hidden private spaces and carefully designed gardens with romantic hidden paths among the trees, deliberately facilitated discreet romantic encounters between soldiers. Traditional wrestling competitions, completely naked, functioned socially as elaborate courtship rituals, where particularly athletic and handsome winners inevitably attracted romantic admiration and sexual desire from spectators. The famous marching songs that legions rhythmically sang during long, exhausting marches openly celebrated loves between companions, using sophisticated military metaphors comprehensible to all. Simple daily gestures, such as personally cooking a special meal for a beloved companion, intimately sharing fine wine from a single cup, or carefully carving the beloved's name on one's personal weapons, were all universally recognized as profound gestures of romantic love. Advanced couple combat techniques systematically taught, strategically exploited the deep intimacy between lovers, creating absolutely lethal combat teams that instinctively anticipated each other's movements with superhuman precision born from intimate knowledge of bodies. Love letters regularly exchanged between distant military fortresses kept alive complex romantic networks throughout the empire, with passionate poetry and ardent promises of future reunion. Ancient history continues to reveal to us the extraordinary complexity of the universal human experience, and studying it carefully helps us profoundly to better understand ourselves and our contemporary society. Thank you for accompanying me on this fascinating journey of discovery among the most intimate and hidden secrets of the ancient Roman world. If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe. Share with those who love history. Thank you for listening. See you next time.